Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Hello, I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience.
And Kate and I are storytellers, and for an hour we also get to be kind of producers and directors of a television show about
storytelling, what we like best.
And we have a very interesting gift for you today. And we've also been privileged to either be part of or to listen in and to share some really wonderful storytelling in the last month or so. I thought Telebration at Proctor's was just wonderful. And we had how many tellers do we have? I should know.
We had 9 tellers.
9 tellers.
And MC Karen Pillsworth.
Right. And we had an infectious atmosphere. We had a lot of new people tell, some of whom have been on this show, but still new to that gathering.
And one of whom is here today.
One of them is here today. That's right. That's right. And so that we're on kind of a roll.
Well, I thought it was wonderful. I got home and I looked on my computer. I'm a geek. And there was email from one of our listeners, and she wrote, "I've been to 15 of the 17 Telebrations." And I thought, have I been to all of them? Yeah, I've been to all of them. Yeah. 15 of the 17 Telebrations, and this one was wonderful, all caps.
Oh. Well, it's great, and there'll be another one next November in case you're feeling left out. And in the middle of the show, we'll take a little break, and we'll tell you about all the things that are going on in the next 5 or 6 weeks in storytelling coming up, so that there's other opportunities headed for you. I had a kind of a fun experience.
You did?
Stories. Well, in one of my other lives, I do things with.
Not your past life.
No, not my past life. But I do some things with Welcoming Congregations and Room for All, which is a group that advocates for gay and lesbian rights in communities of faith. And I was part of a program that was called Living Through the Turbulence and All That Jazz. And we did a jazz program, worship, service, and celebration. And it was one of the most fun things I've done in quite some time. And I think the story of folks' experience in that milieu is getting better, and it was fun to have it shared by some wonderful musicians who I know, and just great. And I felt uplifted by actually jazz without any words. That was an interesting thing, just the music. So. And how about you? Have you had anything besides Telebration that really kind of struck you in the storytelling world?
Well, I was fortunate enough to be asked to be the featured teller at the storytelling open mic in Saratoga Springs at Cafe Lena in November. And so I had 20 to 30 minutes. And I've been telling stories for like 17 years. And I have in my database of stories over 200 listened. Some of them I told once and kind of went, not a good fit. But, I have a large repertoire of stories. It was like, I can pick 3.
So you didn't try to tell all 200 stories in 20 minutes?
No, I didn't try to take 15 stories and get a 2-minute version of each of them, because most stories can't take that sort of pruning.
Now, I've been in Cafe Lena, so when you're telling stories in Cafe Lena, you're right on that corner stage where like Arlo Guthrie and all those famous people have been, right?
Well, I've told there before.
But like you were the feature teller?
Right. Well, no, I was a surprised guest of Christine Lavin.
Oh.
That she's a folk singer, I'm sorry, who used to waitress at Cafe Lena. And she and I are both knitters. We both had a story published in the same book of stories about knitting. So when I went to see her, I copied out that story, and it involved a Christmas ornament. So I made her one of them. And at intermission, I introduced myself, and I gave her the copy of the story and the instructions on how to knit the ornament as well as the ornament. At the end of intermission, she said, "I'd like to have surprised guests." And at intermission, I met Kate Dudding, and I'd like her to come up and read her story. And so I kind of went up and I said, she handed me the printed copy, and I said, "Oh, I'm a storyteller. I don't need to read it."
We don't read stories.
And about 3 sentences in, I'm thinking, and when was the last time I told this story?
Yeah.
Let's see now. But it all worked out fine. So I was a surprised guest at a, and the house was pretty full that night.
Oh,
so
and then
that was way cool.
And on Monday night, you were the feature teller, so you got your own
Right,
billing.
right.
billing.
It was my name was up in lights. Well, in Cafe Lena, it means it was on the chalkboard. But.
Chalkboard, yeah. For those of you who haven't been at Cafe Lena's up on Violet Street, it's worth the trip. I commend you to their website, and we are doing some storytelling there on December 2nd too. But anyway, it's one of those great socially appropriate and warm fellowship places.
And it's the oldest continuously operating coffee house in the United States.
Now, we've been talking about...
But you might have problems finding it. Somebody, Bonnie Mayan, who's a storyteller from Greene County, hadn't been there in 20 years, and she had forgotten that it's just a door, essentially, at the street level.
It is in an upper room, so to speak.
And so she went past it a couple of times before she found the door.
Well, it's been a fun couple of months for sure as we've gone into our season. And for me, one of the nicest things has been some of the new tellers that have either come to Story Circles meetings here at the Colonie Library or at the open mics, or arrive here as guests of ours to talk about storytelling, because storytelling is the oldest art form in existence, and it really involves the power of words, the power of imagination, the power of images, all sorts of things that you don't see really, but you certainly feel them. And we can see them in our memories and imagination, so I suppose we actually do see them. I stand corrected.
Someone started a book of Irish stories by saying stories should entertain in the moment and give a memory worth having.
Give a memory worth having.
So seeing is semi-irrelevant in that realm.
Well, I like the quote, and I can hardly wait until St. Patrick's Day to try to weave it into a routine. No, but our guest is Lale Davidson, and Lale joins us from Saratoga Springs. She's a professor, associate professor at Adirondack Community College. She teaches creative writing. So we're welcoming you here as a storyteller, but we're very well aware and very much in awe of all the other talents that you bring to your role as a story. Welcome.
Thank you.
And she's the second of the 3 snickering witches that we've had as guests.
The second of the 3 snickering witches. This was a vintage early storytelling trio of phenomenal storytellers who took on the aura. Aura? Is that a fair?
I think that's a good word.
I think that's a good thing. And I only know 2 out of 3 now, but I can tell you that there's a certain aura to these snickering witches, I'll tell you, for sure.
Yeah, we told together for about 10 years, all over the capital region. And we aren't telling any more together, although we may again shortly. We may do an album together. But we just got kind of too busy, and our lives started going in other directions.
Were you all writers? I know Barbara Chapitis was also a writer.
Yes, we all met at SUNY Albany in the creative writing graduate program.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah.
Oh, I guess I wasn't
And you
aware
were
of that.
snickering in the back of the classrooms?
And we were snickering, yeah. No, we weren't. We weren't that kind of people. But Barbara came up with that name, and we featured stories about strong and clever women. So I guess she thought we'd reclaim the bad word of witch and make it into a good word.
Well, she did put a positive spin on it. When I first talked to her about that name, she was quite adept at it, and it's convinced me to think about witches differently. I just want you to know.
Wise women.
Wise woman.
Wise.
Wise woman.
Yeah, there are good witches and there are bad witches.
There you go. Now, you began kind of in writing. When did you kind of determine that you're also a storyteller in the oral sense?
I always loved reading my stories aloud, and I always got the best response from people when I read aloud. And you know, I think I come from a family of storytellers. My aunt, I can remember sitting around the table at Thanksgiving, and my aunt was a phenomenal storyteller and tell us just family stories. She was a doctor, so she had a lot of kind of gory stories. And then her husband, also my uncle, was also a really fabulous storyteller. So I grew up kind of admiring the ability to spin a good yarn at the table. I didn't know that I could do it myself until I was probably, you know, in my teens. And I remember coming home and visiting one of my best friends from grade school and sitting at the table with her parents. And I was talking a mile a minute, and she was smiling. And I said, "What?" And she said, "You're a raconteur." And I thought, what's that mean?
What's that mean? I had to go look that one up. But once I looked it up, I knew what I was. Right. That was good. That was good. You're probably not admitting to being grown up yet, but where did you go to you know, high school and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I went to a really wonderful school called Buxton School in Williamstown, Massachusetts,
Okay.
a private high school, and then went out to Oberlin College out in Ohio. Yeah.
Oh, an Oberlin. Oh,
Yeah.
There's been a few Oberlin folks. I think one of the kids from Children at the Well, Ada Hetko, is at Oberlin as we speak, and I think she's a senior this year.
Yeah.
And she came to the National Storytelling Network's annual meeting in Cincinnati, and it was just fun because we got to introduce her to other storytellers nationally who were kind of her age, and we knew her when.
And also that I think the third year of Children at the Well, there had been a presentation at the annual conference of it. And the very first year, a Brimstone Award from the National Storytelling Network had funded Children at the Well.
Wow.
So people there knew of them and were very happy to meet one of the children at the well. Well, I guess young women at the well.
Young women at the well. So Oberlin has a great storytelling route, at least in my life, and I didn't go there, but I just it's a great story of a wonderfully progressive place to spend time as a kid.
It is, and it was full of wonderful students. I always feel that I learned as much from my fellow students as I did from my teachers. They're, you know, very motivated, very smart people go to that college, and you know, people who are motivated to change the world, make it a better place.
No, it's really true. It's a great place. Now, we'd like you to tell a story because that's really why we're all here. But we'd love to give a little background on the story and maybe then just get into it.
Sounds good.
Sure. I guess, you know, having mentioned my aunt and uncle, I think it's, you know, really fitting actually that I'm telling a family story. So it's based on a story that I learned later in life, sort of about my father and about his mother and actually my aunt as a little girl. She's not a big character in it, but. And then I wrote it into a short story that was produced as a part of an opera. My sister is a composer, Tina Davidson, is a contemporary American composer, and Opera Delaware commissioned her to write an opera, which was performed there. And The Haunting of Zelda, which is my story, is part of that opera.
Wow. Well, this.
So this is the non-singing version.
This
is
like the libretto is what we're talking about. All right, we know about libretto, don't we? All right, I met Sam libretto once. Okay. Well, this is
at his deli. Right?
At his deli, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I wrote it, you know, out, and I don't usually tell stories that I write. I usually develop my stories telling them in front of an audience. So this was really a different kind of story. So then an actress performed my words. So then I had actually I've performed it once on the radio, but this time I really had to take the written piece and take it back off the page and make it back into an oral tale. So it's changed. Shall I begin?
Yes.
Please do.
The Haunting of Zelda. As I stood there, looking at the outhouse, leaning at a precarious angle, and the rusted hand pump by the kitchen door, I wondered why I had come to my uncle's house. He had died not long ago, and ever since the funeral, my father had been unable to enter the house where he had grown up with his brother and his 2 sisters. So I had come maybe to clean the house up and get it ready for sale, but maybe to settle. I really wasn't sure. Now, empty houses are usually still as death, but when I opened that front door, I was met with a distinct impression of voices recently hushed. And though the passageway down the hall was blocked by great big curling sheets of Victorian wallpaper that were peeling off the wall, it seemed as if somebody had recently passed from one room to the next. And the Victorian lace curtains, now stiff and yellow with age, had been pushed to the side as if someone had just been standing there looking out the window. The house is bisected by this hallway with the front door on one end and the back door on the other. So I made my way gingerly down the hall past the wallpaper to open the doors to air it out because it was so dusty. It looked like my uncle had not cleaned it in years. But the door seemed to be locked and there was no key in the hole. Next to that door was the door to my uncle's study, which I knew because I had been there when he was alive. And when I pressed that door open, I was met with piles of paper, newspaper clippings, pictures, letters, just covering every surface and spilling onto the floor. And gleaming over the dusty boxes was a pair of eyes that I recognized was the portrait of my grandmother hanging off a porcelain knob. And under the cracked upright piano was a child's schoolroom slate with the name Zelda carved in the wooden frame. Zelda. Zelda. Nobody in our family was called by that name. It made me wonder. Now, in the first few days of cleaning the house, I didn't notice the effect that it had on me. At night, it whispered to itself, an ongoing hushaby of creaking floorboards and shifting timbers, a soft, sighing recantation of long-dead secrets. But many times I would be awakened from the refuge of sleep by the ruffled purr of the boiler igniting itself. But was it the boiler that had awoken me? Sometimes I would lie there listening to the sound of my breath and become frightened that the breath was not my own. And once, in the early, somber blues of dawn, one sound distinguished itself from all the rest, a light footfall outside my bedroom door. By day, as I cleaned, a miscellany of noises began to follow me around the house. A little tapping here, a little knocking there. I would be washing the door in the living room and I would hear a little tapping behind it. I'd open the door, but there was nothing there. Well, that was easily explained away. I mean, you know, with the expansion and contraction of heat, of the wood and the heat and the cold, that could make that noise. But then I'd go to the kitchen and to empty the bucket of water, and I'd hear this irritated shuffling noise under the kitchen table. It started to make me edgy. I was constantly jumping and turning around with pounding heart. By day, as I cleaned, I told myself that habit is a blind and powerful force, that objects could have a memory of sorts. The stairs were used to being walked on, so they creaked. The living room was used to being lived in, so it rustled. But at night, my dreams grew troubled. In them, windows flew open and slammed shut with a fury I didn't know my mind could possess. My cleaning grew more intent and almost obsessive. I opened up the windows in my uncle's study to air it out, but I couldn't stop myself from looking at the portrait of my grandmother. My eyes always seemed to be drawn there. Even from the other room, my eyes would be drawn back to that portrait. And I began to notice that on sunny days, a fierce light shone in her eyes, and her face looked stern. But on cloudy days, the dogmatism turned to desperation, and those stern lines looked more like those of suffering. I wondered what she had guarded and what she had lost. I thought I'd ask my father if he ever called. I'd left several messages for him, but he wasn't very good at answering machines. The leaves began to fall, and I began to mislay things. I found my comb in the refrigerator. You could chalk that up to multitasking, I suppose. But how do you explain the jump rope that I found tied to the porcelain knob of the outhouse door that was definitely not there before? One day, after a rain, a red India rubber ball materialized in a puddle in the front lane. And one day, I found my glasses hanging off a low branch. One night, I was doing the crossword puzzles in the living room, and someone tugged my hair. When I turned back to pick up my pencil, I couldn't find it anywhere. Winter came, white and bitterly cold. Whenever I stepped outside, the wind tore at my face. There was a rainstorm that froze into black ice that coated all the branches, and when the wind blew, they would clack on the windows like angry bones. It was dark in the house, and the face of my grandmother suffered in all that darkness. It looked to me like the muscles around her eyes were frozen, and like she was straining against the tight collar of her dress, like she was gritting her teeth behind her pressed lips, as if she was fighting to hold something back. And the little noises steadily grew louder and more violent. I found a doll with bite marks in the arm that definitely were not there before. The leg of my favorite chair one day caved in and the whole thing thudded to one side. Again, I tried to explain that away. It was old furniture. It wasn't used to this new activity. But one day, the mirror on my grandmother's vanity suddenly slammed backwards into the wall. And one morning, I was wounded to find my favorite bowl smashed. And what was worse, it was smashed with such force that it was nothing but colored sand. I began to wake exhausted by dreams, but I couldn't remember them as anything but these dark shapes that hung over me for the better part of the day. Finally, I rescued one image. It was the image of a young girl, maybe 4, maybe 5, with wavy blonde hair and gray eyes. But she was running outside in the snow with bare feet. Her coat was unbuttoned and the dress trailed out. And I called to her, and she turned around and looked at me, but she wouldn't come, and her brow was furrowed in anger. I brooded on her face all day long. That night, I sat in the living room with a blanket wrapped around my legs because it was so cold. The wind was whipping up around the edge of the house, making high bottle notes on the lip of the chimney. I kept stirring the fire, but it seemed more like it was sucking the warmth out of the room rather than warming it up. All of a sudden, I noticed that the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. I'd heard something. Mama! Something other than the wind. It was a small, high voice at the back door. Mama! Mama! Let me in! I stopped breathing to hear it better. The voice went on, so sad, so persistent. Suddenly, I stood up. I knew it was Zelda. She was here. What should I do? Should I let her in? What if she was angry? What if she wanted revenge? What could I do to help her? But the voice went on, so persistent, so sad. Just calling, Mama, Mama, Mommy, let me in. Not angry at all, just confused. Suddenly, I understood the expression on my grandmother's face. She had always heard that voice, and her insides ripped to get to it. I became speed itself. I picked up the poker, and I threw myself at the door, and I wrenched at it. I jammed the poker around the edge to see if I could lever it open, but I couldn't open the door. I threw down the poker, and I ran out of the front of the house and all the way around to the back. And there, up against the back door, was nothing but a snowdrift that the wind had blown up. And the wind was gone, and the voice had stopped. And I stood there, empty. If it would have helped, I would have picked the very snow up in my arms, and perhaps it would have helped me. The house was quiet after that. Not a timber stirred. Silence saturated the woodwork, numbing all fear and pain. And the silence was worse to me than all the scary noises I had ever heard. And I recognized the silence. It was the silence of my father. Dad, I finally got him on the phone. Who's Zelda? There was a sudden absence on the other end of the line, almost as if he'd hung up, a tiny void. And then he spoke hazily. Oh, haven't I ever told you about... Zelda was his youngest sister. She was too young to go to school with all the other kids, so she stayed home every day with her mother while my grandmother was trying to get her work done. And one day, she must have been pestering the life out of my grandmother, and so my grandmother bundled her up and sent her out into the snow and the fresh air to play, because it was good for her lungs. And then she got back to whatever it was she was doing. But she lost track of time. Hours passed, and she forgot all about Zelda. When she remembered, she ran outside in a panic. Zelda! Zelda! But no one answered. She looked down in the snow, and she found her footsteps, and she followed them, and they led her all over to the jump rope, to the red India rubber ball, and all the way around to the back of the house, where there she was, lying in a tiny weeping heap up against the back door, shaken and blue with cold. You see, she was too young to understand that that was the back door, not the front door, and that they never used that door. It had been nailed shut. There was furniture in front of it, and that nobody would even think to listen for a child at that door. She got chilled and caught a cold, and the cold turned to pneumonia, and she died. And my grandmother took to her bed in grief and stayed there for a long time. How long? I asked my father. I don't know, he said. And I could imagine him and his brother standing by their mother's bedside in some mute eternity, waiting for her to rise. And then my grandmother says that she had a vision, that Jesus Christ appeared to her at the foot of her bed, floating in midair, his eyes glittering on either side of his nose, of his hawkish nose, and his bare toes splayed from so much barefoot walking. And he held his arms out to her and he said, "You are saved." And that's what gave my grandmother the strength to rise from her bed and go on with her life. You see, my father said, she was afraid. She thought she was going to hell for sure for what she had done, and she didn't mind the idea of punishment. She felt she deserved it, but what she couldn't bear was the thought that if she went to hell, she would never see her baby girl again. So when Christ said that she was saved, she rejoiced, because she knew she'd meet her again. The house stayed quiet all through January and February, and I don't know why I didn't pick up and move. I was just kind of suspended in limbo. But the seasons change as they always do, and with the softening of the cold, the little voices, the little sounds returned. I could have cried with relief, because even though I knew how strange it was to make a place at the table for the spirit of loss, I welcomed her in. I relished the little noises that followed me around the house. I laughed at looking at things that I knew I hadn't mislaid. I hugged the doll with a bitten arm because, you see, the haunting of Zelda answered something in me that I had never known was a question.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wow. Wow. And I commend you for all the word pictures you painted, and just the way you used the language about the bottle top whistle on the top of the chimney is the one I can remember first, and just so many wonderful uses of the language to be descriptive. Just zeroed in on so much emotion. It was really, really quite something.
Thank you.
Really quite something. And I need to talk a little bit about just the conversion to music. And did the opera follow that storyline as well?
There were kind of two stories that were spliced together, and so the story that was sung was about a widow whose only son had gone to war, and actually it was in World War II, and he had been killed at war, and she had never recovered from that grief. So that story of the one child being lost was kind of spliced together with the story of Zelda, and so the teller told it, and there was kind of a cellist playing in the background. It's beautiful. Yeah.
And the source of the story was a family story or a legend, or?
Yeah, Zelda really did catch pneumonia and die, and my grandmother was a very religious person, and she did think she had a vision that enabled her to go on. So, and that is my uncle's house. There's some fiction in there, though.
Well, don't tell me what it was, because
Yeah.
I'm believing all of it. I mean, just but at any rate.
Poetic license.
Yes, poetic license.
And in terms of harvesting the story, you heard the story from your dad or your uncle, or?
I did hear it from my dad, and I don't really remember. I do know that I thought there were only 4 children in his family, and I didn't know about the existence of Zelda, and I can't remember when I learned the story. And it was a fairly undramatic, moment when he told it to me, but it captured my imagination, and the fact that he had never mentioned her before, and he is a very quiet man. He's still alive, and I just, I really felt that was part of it. That was part of his silence. That it had never. I wondered if he had ever really recovered from that loss.
Well, and from the grieving of his mom.
Yeah.
The grieving of the house.
Yeah, how frightening to be a child that you've lost your youngest sister and then your mother's collapsed. And it seemed, it must have been terrifying.
Mm-hmm. His whole world was falling apart.
Yeah.
And what was the age difference? About how old was he?
I think 3 or 4 years difference.
Okay,
so he would have been 9 or so. I'm not positive.
A lot of children don't experience a death in the family until they're much older.
Yeah.
And then it's usually, when my grandparents died, I went, oh, well, they were old. They died.
Yeah.
But a sibling. Yeah.
Right, a younger sibling. That's a lot to take in when you're 9.
And I've read also that parents treat their surviving children quite differently afterwards, as you can imagine. That my grandmother was a very, very strong woman of strong convictions, and very generous and loving and dogmatic, but and very full of life. But I imagine that she had a hard time forgiving herself. You know, that she really felt that it was her fault. And you know, I've read since then that, you know, they've done studies that getting it chilled does not give you pneumonia. So, you know, she probably, it was a bacteria floating around that she caught, and it probably wasn't my grandmother's fault, but she thought it was.
Yeah. My. Great story. Thank you.
But were there ever days when your grandmother kind of retreated?
You know, I didn't see her that often, but what I remember most about her was at the dinner table, they would always say a blessing before the meal, and her prayers were inordinately long, and they would go, and she would work herself into a kind of a fervor of, like, you know, of rocking and crying and praising, and you know, I didn't understand it as a child. It seemed odd to me, but that story kind of explained it to me.
Yeah, I just remember somebody I knew who was one of 9 children, and one of her brothers was killed in a car accident when he was 19. And she said, you know, so this woman had 8 other children. Yeah. But not him. Yeah. He wasn't there, and there were some days that was the child she wanted to see. Yeah. You're never the same.
Yeah, I have a friend who's the mother of 6 children, and one son died in a motorcycle accident, and every year on the anniversary of his death, she just goes to bed for 3 days and stays there, and she doesn't even fight it. And
It's wow. So I often say that stories have both a universal and a specific reference, and the loss of a child being the universal, and then the specific one of your own case. And I've been thinking about 2 other situations that I've lived through with never having lost my own children, but you know, they certainly do stay with parents. That's an issue.
And saying life is never the same is such an understatement. But I've never experienced the loss of a child, but I've listened to a few people who have, and it's more like a limb is gone. It's a constant
piece of yourself. Wow.
I know. Is this a Christmas show?
Well, I was thinking about Christmas. Speaking about losing a son, here we go. This is the month of Christmas, and in some ways, other than my necktie, which
and I have on my Christmas socks, but they're rather subtle.
And there are some Christmas events actually coming up, and we'd like to talk about those right now so that you get an idea of what's happening.
And so we don't start crying. So on Sunday, December 2nd, 2 p.m. at Cafe Lena, there will be Stories of the Season. Joe Doolittle organized this, and he's going to be MC. I feel, I don't know, is your hand behind my head, or is
No, I'm just going to put on I'm going to try to lighten the load now. If you come to Cafe Lena at 2 o'clock on the 2nd of December, we're going to have a really great lineup of Stories of the Season. It'll be a little bit interfaith. It'll be fun, and you'll probably get a red nose. And the only thing about a red nose that I'll tell you is that their value is that you can't take yourself too seriously in a red nose.
Yes, despite the season or how much you've had to drink or not.
Actually, having a lot to drink really helps, actually.
And our tellers will be Joe, me, Betty Cassidy, Margaret French, Christy Keegan, and Joe Peck. And it's a benefit for both Cafe Lena and Story Circle at Proctor's. We'll use the money to underwrite storytelling events in the communities, in our communities, mostly in libraries, but in other community venues.
And where and when is that again?
And that's at Cafe Lena.
Cafe Lena.
Sunday, December 2nd,
December 2nd.
at 2 p.m.
At 2 p.m.
So it's not the first, Thanksgiving is kind of early this year, so it's the second Sunday after Thanksgiving.
Okay.
This is the second time our Story Circle has done a Christmas or a holiday themed event up there, and we thought it was something we'd like to do, but we didn't want to get overexposed, so we probably won't do it every year. But anyway.
I never understand the buy thing, but periodic. Periodic.
And we like to tell at Cafe Lena.
Oh yes,
That's
Cafe
the other
Lena
thing.
is a lovely. While we do programs at Proctor's, I never envision us telling in the main theater.
Right.
Because that seats 2,500 people, and you can't see all their faces. I've been on the stage there, not performing, on a tour of the building, and I looked up at the last row in the balcony, and I could just about see the chairs, and I tried to imagine a face, and it was going, no, storytelling is an intimate experience, and so Cafe Lena is a wonderful place to tell because it has that intimacy.
It would be really difficult to nose the entire theater at Proctor's. We could get away with nosing all the people over Red. And I'll come back and tell you a nosing story in a minute.
Okay, so that's what I know about December, other than the storytelling open mic, which in December is on the second Wednesday of the month at Woodlawn Commons. You can look up more information on that on our website, storycircle@proctors.org, and click on open mic.
And we are doing a little bit of a workshop and a roundtable theme for our December storytelling guild meeting at the Gilderland Library, or Pine Hills Library.
Yes.
The Pine Hills Library, right up on the upper part of Madison and Western Avenue, and it'll be stories of the season, and we're going to be there telling and listening to more Christmas stories. So if you don't make it to Cafe Lena, please try to make it to the Pine Hills Library.
The big sigh was on the odd months, we're here at Colonie Town Library at 6:30, and on the even months, we're at the Pine Hills branch of Albany Public Library at 6:15. So the big sigh was, okay, December, is that an odd or even month? And we alternate between, it's the third Tuesday at Colonie and it's the third Wednesday. This is not part of, we do not have to pass an intelligence test. This was mainly to accommodate people's schedules. Some people, do everything, some people do something every Tuesday night or every Wednesday night. So we've had this tradition as long as I've been a member of this alternating pattern to accommodate
people working, right?
Yeah, not as I said, an intelligence test or meaning to confuse people. And I thought we also should mention our first Story Sunday in 2013 because it comes so early in January.
In the new year.
In the new year. Once again, we're going to have Joe and Jesse Bruchac. Joe and Jesse Bruchac. There we go. Moon of Long Nights. And of course, long nights are what we have in early January.
And that's the Abenaki word for January in terms of where the root of it. And Joe and Jesse are Abenaki Indians in some version. And if you don't know,
part of their heritage.
Part of their heritage. Right. And if you don't know their work, they really are both now very renowned Native American writers and authors, storytellers, and cultural anthropologists, so that the stories are based in the Abenaki, which is the people of the northern woodlands in New England for the most part, originally. And it's a fascinating thing for me to be around Joe, just because I like him, and I always feel better for being around him.
Yes, yes. Now, your description, if people didn't know them, they sound, and no offense, very academic and dry.
Yeah.
And they are the last, they're the antithesis of that. Joe has been a member of the Adirondack Liars Club,
right,
a group that springs up here or there now and then. And you can see them on our YouTube channel.
Right.
If you go to storycircle@proctors.org and click on YouTube, they were here several years ago, and one of the stories, I believe they did a bilingual story.
They did a bilingual story.
That Joe told it in English, a sentence or two at a time, and then Jesse translated it. And as I recall, Joe said, and he ran and ran over all the hills and through the valleys and through the mountains and finally got, he went on and finally got home. And then Jesse went, blah, blah. And then he smiled and said, I said, he went home.
They are fun, and we
wise,
we commend them to you. We
Yes.
hope to see you at the Glenn Sanders Mansion.
And Jesse also told a story all in Abenaki, and he told us it was about raccoon, I think it was. And there was enough gesture, there was enough for you to figure out who raccoon met at the side of the river and what happened because of that.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yes. So we've had, I mentioned our website with the YouTube videos. We have about 80 videos now, and over 14,000 of them have been watched in a few months short of 2 years.
And it's really a product of this TV show, because we do edit the stories from the guest tellers and put them up on the website. And they're available for people. And if you're talking with somebody who says, I don't know what a story Sunday would be like, and you want to hear Jesse Bruchac tell a story, then just refer them to the website on the YouTube link, and they can get a little taste of what storytelling is all about.
It's not quite as delicious as being there.
No.
Because when you're in a live storytelling event, the storyteller is looking at you and watching you, and if you start going like that, the teller might go, well, your story, I don't know if you would break it out of the telling of it, but you might look at them and nod back that you see they're with you, or when I see confused faces, I know, oh, I better. What did I just say? They aren't with me anymore. For this audience, I need to stick in something else. So there's a bit of improvisation, and the audience is a really important part of a storytelling experience. That Laura Sims said, a storyteller from New York City who's been doing this as her life's work, said, I tell one story, but every person there hears their own. I think of it as that they're listening to it through the filter of their life's experiences. And so, the loss of a child, for some people they may remember, their own young relative that had died, or the creepy old house they went into with the wallpaper peeling down. And for a little bit they kind of drift off into their memories, and then they come back to see, what's this one about though? So while we recommend our YouTube channel, we highly recommend the live storytelling experience, because there's nothing like it.
And we also like you to know that we are a not-for-profit organization. We are a production company, and we finance our efforts through ticket sales and also through contributions. And you can become part of the producing team here at Story Circle at Proctor's by going to our website and at storycircle@proctors.com and clicking on how you can help and taking it from there.
Right. And luckily this year, 98% of our costs at Proctor's for using the Proctor's facilities and their wonderful staff have been paid by our contributions. So more money will be going to our storytellers. Not enough to get a good meal, but
well, we do have some delicious meals at the Glenn Sanders.
Right. But my first hope is to get storytelling known in the Capital District, and then is to actually get storytellers paid as as if we're a living wage.
Living wage, a living wage.
But that's a ways down. Most
It isn't
storytellers
necessary, but it's
have
really good to have a day job.
Yes, exactly. A day job is pretty good, nifty. Well, we have about 9 minutes left, Joe.
Well, I can always do something with red noses, and I do have them for you. And I'm going to, for those of you who don't know my history, I've been giving away red noses for a long time. And I had a friend who was in clown college at Schenectady Community College. And she was a friend of my wife, and she came in the kitchen one Saturday morning, and she looked at me, and I can be a little bit of a hard case type A person. And she gave me a red nose, and she said, put this on, because there's no way you can take yourself too seriously in a red nose. So I did, and I had a really good time looking at myself and laughing in the mirror. And you may think I look completely ridiculous, and that's my intent. So a couple of weeks later, I was doing some carol singing at an office party, and I got a lot of people up as volunteers to do, you know, Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donder and Blitzen, and right at Blitzen, before I did, and do you recall the most famous reindeer of all, I plunked the first volunteer with a red nose. And everybody went, ooh, and I realized that if I had had a bucket of them, I could have sprinkled a little joy through the whole place. So I immediately went out and began to buy them wholesale. And I travel with them on planes, and I pull them out of my pocket. And for a while I wasn't paying cash for drinks. I was just, bartering with the stewards and the stewardesses for red noses. And then finally the Southwest Airlines people, I travel a lot consulting, they told me I had to pay cash. They weren't going to go through this anymore, that I just had to. And so I have this pattern of giving noses to people, and probably one of the best nose stories I can think of is I have a friend who I can use his name, it's not a breach of confidentiality because he's a good friend. Dave Schweizer used to run the Funston Lumber Company, and he's now retired. And he had prostate cancer. So I was aware of that at church, and I gave him some red noses, and I said, I'd send you flowers, but it's kind of a guy thing, but here, you may find use for these. And then in the course of life, things get away. I did write him a couple notes. I talked to him on the phone. And I'm in the lumber yard one day, in the shop, paying for some furring strip or something I picked up. And he's at the cash register. And I says, hey, Schweizer, I never found out. What did you do with my nose? He says, oh, I never told you that story. And he leans over the register. He says, well, Carol's kind of an artist. I says, yeah. He says, well, on my last trip, they put you in that little Johnny coat. They tattoo you with all these things so they get the right shot down so your body looks really wild. So I said, oh, I've been overexposed. Get the doctor. And I had the nose on. And the radiologist came in, and he was a little indignant because they don't like to get bothered by jokes like this. And so he says, okay, get him ready. And so the tech went to put me in my place. And as they flipped up the Johnny coat to expose the target, Carol had written in a magic marker, a target. And right in the middle of the target was a red nose as the bullseye. And above that, she'd written, that's all, folks. And everybody exploded in laughter, including people in the waiting room, because they'd kind of been put onto it by Carol, and that's what was going on. And, it was one of the nicest little bits of laughter I had through my whole experience. And fortunately, we can all laugh about it now. Now, I'll tell you, he told that story, and there must have been 20 people standing around the register, and they were all laughing and sharing the good feeling of him being restored. And in some respects, the moment would have never happened if it hadn't been for his wife gluing one of my noses on his rear end. And so with that, Kate, I suppose I could say, I hope you have a really good Merry Christmas.
We have a few more minutes. I don't like the nose personally because it gives me double vision, and I find it very distracting. But as I was driving down here, I was thinking, do I have a little Christmas story? And I remembered part of one of Becky Holder's stories, that part of her childhood, she grew up in her grandparents' home in one of the steel towns in Ohio. It was a two-family house right next to another two-family house. Her father, as I recall, was between jobs, so the family was staying with the grandparents. And they're, you know, two-family houses, they don't have big yards. And so the next two-family house was probably, 15 feet away. And Becky recalls that it was the mirror image. So the bow window in her grandmother's house looked out into the bow window at the Rosenbergs, well, flat. And she said, every December, everything in my grandmother's flat was red or green. All the decorations were red or green, except for a sign that she always hung in her dining room window, and that was blue and silver. And she hung it so the Rosenbergs could read it, and it said, Happy Hanukkah. And Mrs. Rosenberg, in her window, had a sign that was red and green that said, Merry Christmas.
Oh. Mm-hmm. Wow. That is such a good story. I do remember Becky telling us that.
That's a fragment of a larger story of hers. But I thought that was friendship, neighbors, multicultural. It's just a nice story.
Well, I just want to know, my story dealt with kind of a Christmas idea and really the tail end of life, and yours kind of have raised us to a higher level. Thank you so much, Kate.
My pleasure, Joe. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm Lale.
Yes.
Yes. I'm always going, is it Lale as in Valley or Lolly as in Pop? But it's more Lale as in Valley.
More Lale, yeah.
Not Lolly, yes.
And we would hope that you'll look for Lale as a participant in one of our other upcoming storytelling programs. And we hope that you'll avail yourself of some of the other opportunities. And we really appreciate you watching and spending time with us as we kind of share the human experience that is story by story.
Mm-hmm.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning